There you go. Great. You can get started.
Okay, I'm Joe Applebaum from New York Thoroughbred Horsemen's Association. Kyle, joining me are Joe Longo, the general manager at the New York Racing Association. Joe and I mostly headed up this project. Wande Owens, who's interning for us over the next 4 to 5 months here at university. And racing celebrity, Andy Serling, expert on all things track bias. I thought we'd get Andy on to liven things up.
I've heard him talk about it. All right.
So anyway, Kyle, why don't you introduce yourself and talk us through your and we have Davis Klein, who also works on a lot of digital stuff at night with us, with Joe and myself.
Sure.
Yep. So I'm a bit late, but looking forward to hearing from you guys.
All right. Well, Kaggle had me make a PowerPoint, so I believe it might be as an attachment, but I could actually just share my screen, and that'll probably be just the same. So let's see here. All right. So you should hopefully be seeing what I'm seeing.
Yeah, perfect.
All right, good deal. Then I'll just kind of go through it and I'll talk through it. And then afterwards, and by the way, if you have any questions during it, feel free to interrupt, right?
Before you start,
sure.
Sorry to interrupt. You're saying it's okay to interrupt. Give us a background. You have more knowledge than most of the other Kagglers. You a racing fan.
Yep. So I have some of that coming up pretty quick.
Okay. Sorry.
There, I have 3 things, right? So it shouldn't be too long, but the first one is my background. So that will hopefully answer some of those. All right. So my background is in pure mathematics. So I majored in mathematics, and this is I'm removed from that sometime. I'm 35 years old right now, but I did major in mathematics, and now I'm a math educator. You might be able to see over my shoulder. There's a chalkboard right back there. So anyway, something that set me apart in this competition is my domain knowledge. I knew about horse racing, and I knew a good amount about horse racing, more than my competitors did, right? Because a lot of the people who submitted responses, I would imagine, knew very little about horse racing going into their process, and it was the opposite for me. I actually knew a little about coding, but I knew a lot about horse racing, and so I came at it from a kind of a backwards approach. About I don't know, 10 years ago or so, I kind of taught myself to code with the intention of applying it to horse racing, right? Because that's always been kind of more of a hobby, a fascination. But I love horse racing as a fan, primarily as a gambler. So anyway, you could see a little bit there. I do compete in contests, right? So I imagine most of you know what BCBC and NHC is, right? Those are just major horse racing competitions. But I basically wrote code that predicts the winners of horse races. And I did that and finished that like 5 years ago, and I've been using it ever since. 5 years ago, Ray Pollock had an article about me, and golly, it was a while ago. My kids were very little when that came out, but right, it was about me using that in my success in some competitions, right? So anyway, that's a little bit about my background. All right, so then how did I approach this particular Kaggle competition? Right, so unlike some of the other data science people that I was competing against, I felt like I knew a little bit more about what horsemen and horsewomen would find interesting and useful. Right, because I felt a lot of the competitors were going to try and use this data set to predict results. And I felt like that wasn't NYRA's goal of this, right? Because there's those CAW teams and CRW teams that, they're years ahead of this. And so I felt that NYRA wasn't trying to get people to predict who's going to win a horse race. And that's what a lot of teams actually ended up submitting. So anyway, my approach was a little different, right? It was a unique data set in that, as someone who deals with horse racing data a lot, right? It was unique in that it was data that not a lot of us get to use. So anyway, this was listed on Kaggle, and I felt that my submission kind of hit a lot of these things pretty spot on, right? It was a novel way of looking at the data. It certainly would influence all those decision makings and all that. So anyway, that was a little bit of the background. So getting into my specific submission, it actually required kind of intro level statistical knowledge. I would say it was equivalent to like a stats 200 course, which would be like a second level stats course in most universities. Specifically, it focused on bivariate data, correlation, and a little bit of inference. But unlike a lot of people's, there was no advanced modeling, there was no machine learning, which again set mine apart a little bit. So this chart kind of set apart, or this was what I based my findings on, right? So I was like, wouldn't it be interesting if there was some sort of relationship between order of finish in a race and distance covered, right? So I basically found that data, and it took some work, and my submission actually goes through about how I did that. But once I found it, right, I started to see, okay, is there a relationship? And the result was, in most races, there's not a relationship, right? It's kind of more or less randomly spread out, where some of the top finishers run longer, shorter, some of the middle finishers run longer, shorter. But that wasn't the case for every race, right? So this particular graph, this was in my Kaggle submission. This one actually wasn't. I believe this one had the biggest golden rail bias of any race that year, which is why I have it here. Right, but you could see the horses that ran first, second, third, right? The horses that ran in the money ran shorter distances than the also rans. Right, and I have that one particular horse spotted because I believe he or she, 91 Assault, came out of the race and won the next race, right? And maybe that was a kind of a hidden good performance, right? Because he or she finished sixth, but did run significantly further than some of the top couple finishers. So perhaps if he ran slightly against the bias, it was actually a really good performance. Sure.
Is this a turf race?
This
Hey,
is a turf.
Andy,
Yes.
Oh, you can hear him? I can barely hear him.
Yep. This was a turf race.
Right. No, I agree. I was looking up that day in my notes, and okay, good.
Yeah, and I believe I referenced a one of your tweets from that particular day, because that whole weekend was just littered with a golden rail.
That was the beginning of the meet, and the rails were down, and it was ridiculous.
Okay, right.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yep, you bet. Okay, so anyway, this particular graph was not in my on my Kaggle notebook, but right, you could see that like some races are random, but some races there actually is something to it, right? So that was at least how I started, and I basically looked at every single race. I didn't make a fancy graph for every single race, but right, I looked at every single race to see what was the issue, and I was like, okay, well, let's see if I could come up with some sort of metric that kind of measures the relationship between the order of finish and the distance covered. right? So then that became kind of my goal, right? After I have a graph for all these races, could I come up with some sort of way to measure that? Right. So I ultimately did. Right. So my metric that I ultimately decided on, and this is pretty much as mathy as this presentation gets. But I chose a metric between -50 and +50, where -50 would be a very, very extreme dead rail, so an outside bias, and +50 would be the opposite. So +50 would be the most extreme golden rail. Right. So there's some reasons why I chose -50 and +50. Most statisticians view significance as basically less than 0.5. And it's kind of, for many statisticians, is very binary, right? So if it's less than 0.5, they view it as it's significant. The data is significant. So that means if you end up with a p-value of 0.001, that's less than 0.5. That's kind of the same as 0.049, also less than 0.5. So with that in mind, my goal was to create kind of a layman's metric, right? One that would be easily understood by the public. And I knew that comparing small decimals is probably not a good idea when you're talking to the general public. So I decided on just using the reciprocal of that to turn it into basically a score, right? Because if you're dealing with really small decimals, if you take the reciprocal of them, then they turn into large numbers. And then I capped it at 20, again, because that 0.05, the reciprocal of that is 20. So a perfect score for any individual race would be 20. That would indicate the most extreme bias you could have. And then I used other nearby races to help with its reliability, because often, and this is something just I have observed in watching races going back, right, several years, that if there's a bias, it's typically not just one race at a time, right? It's all the races on a card or several of the races on a card. And sometimes it's all the races on a weekend, or a lot of the races in a particular weekend. Right. So with that in mind, I kind of just combined it all together, right? So you have the score for just one race, you have a similar score for all the races on the same surface on the same day, and then you have the one for the whole week. And so combined, you add all those together and you get a score between -50 and +50. So anyway, that was a little bit of my thought process as to how I came up with that score. Right, so it's uses charts like this, but it also combines similar races on the same surface. All right, and so then does this work, right? So I had this score for every race, right? And I was like, okay, well, does this work, or is it just random BS? Right, so something that was kind of eye-opening for me, as you could see, it was July 26th. And I have a graph that goes along with this on the next page. Right, but July 26th was Saratoga, obviously, and it was a off the turf day. So it had rained.
2019, Kyle?
What's that?
2019?
Yes, this is all 2019, correct. This was an off the turf day, and I believe the track was listed as either muddy or I think it was maybe sealed muddy or whatever. It doesn't really matter. But of all the 2,000 races in the sample, only 95% of them had a race metric of -14 or less. But 4 of those were on this particular day, right? So out of 10 races on this card, the chance of having something with a 5% probability is very, very small of just happening randomly, right? That's like
one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sealed. There were only 8 dirt races that day. I think there were 1 on each course for its worth. Just
okay, perfect. Well, then maybe that's okay. Well, that means that it's even less likely.
And I have a massive dead rail for what it's worth. So
okay, right, and that's exactly what my data indicates, is that it was a super big dead rail. And you know, when stuff rains, I also know kind of anecdotally, when a bunch of weather comes, funny things happen to courses like that. And that's obviously what happened here, is the inside was just a bog, I'm imagining. And so that was no good. But like what happened here statistically, it's similar to like if I give someone, okay, pick a number between 1 and 20, and I'm going to give you 10 chances and you get it right. Or no, I'm going to give you 8 chances, right? That's how many races there were. I'm going to give you 8 chances to guess a number between 1 and 20, and you get it right 4 out of 8 times, right? Like the probability of that happening is almost 0. And that's what happened here. So that was eye-opening for me, because that indicated to me that my metric actually, it was a little more than just like a random number, right? It actually did indicate, to my eyes, that indicated that it was actually measuring something, right? And this is actually the graph of those dirt races. And you could just see, this is of 4 of the 8, but you could see by these, the horses that won ran longer distances than the also-rans, right? And you could see that generic trend. But there was definitely something happening on that day, and my bias number did indicate that. So that's when I knew that something good is happening here. So also just, and a lot of this is kind of more anecdotal, but my metric did match the eye test, right? So just picking out some notable races, it seemed like what my metric indicated about the horses that ran further, they did tend to run further. And so it matched that. It aligned with that, the Equibase chart calls. If a horse goes 4 wide in one or 6 wide in one, right? It aligned with all that. And also it just aligned with subjective analysis of what the public said, right? Where if there was a weekend where there was a high bias, I did a Twitter search, and obviously Andy would tweet about it, but also there was others that also matched, right? So I was able to kind of compare that. So I felt that all those things kind of said that my metric wasn't just random noise. It actually was measuring something useful. All right, and then just some interesting findings, and then I'm done. And this was actually very interesting to me, and perhaps Andy remembers it. But 2 of the races with the most reliable dead rail were on Travers Day. And I don't particularly remember watching those races live, but I certainly watched the replays after my numbers spit that out. But including the grade 1 H. Allen Jerkins, that had that was the second highest dead rail bias of all the races in the sample. And then when you look at the race, there's a heavy favorite, like, I don't know what Chancellor was. He was odds on, I'm pretty sure. And he took an inside path, and a long shot went much wider and won, right? So that and there was other races on that day that kind of had similar things. And then the Travers, I believe that was 2019 Travers. That was the horse that won the Florida Derby, I think.
Will year, right? It was the maximum security year, right? Code of honor.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I have it massively dead inside too.
That was Shug's horse, right? Yeah. And he went super wide to win the Travers, right? So it seems like that was the best part of the track that day. And again, my numbers did indicate that. Right. So that was just kind of an interesting thing, that on the second biggest Naira day of the year, there was actually a fairly significant bias. And then I just have charts. This is all 2,000 races. Right. So I indicated earlier, the score ranges from -50 to +50. And so anything that would be probably outsides of 10 or -10, I would say there's probably good data indicating a bias. Right. So it turns out that it was about, what do I have it? I think it was like in about 1/5 of the races, there was at least some sort of bias indicated. And then obviously forfeits, you know, all those in the middle. That means there wasn't really much of a bias for that particular race. So this is just kind of everything summarized up. And then this
Hold
was
on,
another.
wait, Kyle, go back a second.
Yep, go ahead.
Sorry.
Yep, go ahead.
Is this in any, right, like, I don't think you meant it to be a bell curve, right? But it
No,
essentially.
it just kind of ended up like that. Right, but it also isn't really tremendously surprising to me that most races, like you don't want a bias in every race. I mean, right, and I'm sure that track maintenance is trying to not have a bias in any race.
Glenn would like no biases, right?
Exactly.
I agree. We have very few. We have many mostly fair tracks. So I agree with your
Here's my question. It's a little more technical. Is 10? Do you have that tuned up to like be one standard deviation, or not really, or?
Yeah. So the 10, it goes back to. Sorry, I'm just going to flip quickly. Right. It goes back to this. Right. So, most statisticians view significance as less than 0.05, and the reciprocal of that is 20, right? So 20 was kind of a key number to me. But many statisticians would also say that if you have a p-value that's less than 0.1, that also indicates that it might be significant, right? So there is a little bit of that gray area. So the reciprocal of 0.1 is 10, right? So it's not quite as significant, but it is saying something, right? So if a individual race was had a p-value less than 0.1, then that would indicate on the other graph that I'm about to flip back to, that would indicate on the outside edges of 10 or negative 10, right? So that also indicated significance, just not as much significance, but I would still say at least it was the hint of a bias on either sides of 10 and negative 10. And your question was, is that like a standard deviation or so? I couldn't answer if I mean, I have all the data. I could probably perform what exactly the standard deviation was. Looking at this, it's probably standard deviation is probably around 5 or so on this.
Okay, I got it. My big question was really, it's more focused on what you were just covering. I know that it's always difficult to put rating systems into some sort of like 0 to 100 system, right? That the public, you know, ESPN has that issue with QBR, their quarterback rating system, right?
And that's 1 to 100 or 0 to 100.
Yeah, it's 0 to 100, but like a 90 is a lot farther away from an 85 than a 55 is to a 60. Even it's apparently 5 points, but as you get farther out on the scale, right, they've had to compress the scale to make everyone fit within that. Anyway, that's a right. I don't want to get too geeky into that, but anyway, okay, we'll go to the slide.
Sure. And then I only had one left, and I thought this would be another kind of interesting way to show the data, right? And it's a little chunky just because I was trying to fit all 100 and whatever racing days onto one graph, but right, this kind of just shows throughout the racing calendar kind of the various ebbs and flows of perhaps what happened, right? And you could indicate Travers Day, I already kind of pointed that out, right? And that's towards the end of the Saratoga meet there, and that's anything that's below the axis, right? That would indicate potentially a dead rail. Anything that is above the axis would indicate golden rail, right? So you can kind of see the severity of the various weekends. And
what was your massive dead rail at Aqueduct? I'm curious. I can look it up. Right near the end of the year. Right?
If you, let's see, I'm gonna do this. I could find that. So that's
could even be December 31st, right? The way it looks on the thing.
Yeah, it could have been. And they raced on that day, right? December 31st.
Unless we canceled, I'll take a look. Hang on.
Yeah, I could find that too.
I think I got rid of it. Hang on.
Let's see here.
Wrong date, wrong place. I have no. I had. That's weird. Hang on. I have a possible dead rail on the 29th. Possible on the 28th.
Now you have me looking. Let's see here.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to bog you down.
No, it's not a problem. I mean, that was basically the end of my presentation. The only other slide I had was any open questions that you maybe had.
I think I have a lot of the horses sitting out in the middle of the track, and I wonder if there was like a perception of a dead rail, but maybe a lot of people stayed out. It was also sloppy. It was fast on Saturday and Sunday, the 29th, 28th, and sloppy and sealed on the 30th, 31st. I have sort of mixed questions about it those days.
Yeah, I'm looking. Let's see what's column is that. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yes, race 2, on the 31st. It was the very last day.
Okay.
Races 1 and 2 and 3, which were, yeah, those were all actually came up with a fairly big dead rail.
Interesting. Okay. I had a lot of logical horses doing well, which always makes me a little bit circumspect whether or not, just on judging.
Correct. But if you look at, I guess, all the horses together, the winners won shorter distances. The also ran longer. So again,
Right.
with this metric, maybe there wasn't anything and it just ended up that way, right? But
no, it's interesting. No, I mean, I trust your numbers sort of more in some questions. I think if you're looking at it overall, but it's not like I didn't think it was possible, so I'm not surprised.
Right, because a metric like this, it doesn't take any storylines into account, right? It just spits out whatever it spits out,
which is pure, so that's fine.
Right.
Okay, who has? I have a lot of questions, but I don't want to always be the guy who jumps in questions. So if anyone has questions, this is a good Joe Longo.
No, Mike, I'm just serving notice. I have to get off here in a minute. I don't have any questions of right now, but just want to say, Kyle, I do appreciate it. And I'll follow up with Andy and Joe after the call.
Sure. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Well, if no one's I'm gonna start firing away. Okay.
Sure.
I can see you did a turf dirt split. Have you thought about doing, or did you think about doing like a sprint route split? Or
I did think about that. And there probably would be some sort of separation. I would, if I had to guess, there would be some sort of difference between that. But you don't want to overfit the data also, right? So I didn't want to have too many splits, and then on one day there might be only one turf sprint or something, and then you run into small sample sizes, and that could be an issue also. And also, at the end of the day, I thought that surfaces are so if the dirt course has an inside bias, it's going to come into play on all distances. So at least that was my thinking. But yes, I did consider that. And I still have the data, so ultimately I could see if that pans out. But for the competition, I decided just to roll with turf versus dirt.
Joe, what I would also add to that, I mean, obviously, Kyle, feel free to disagree or whatever. The only time it's going to really matter is 2 turns, right? Which is mile and 1/8 races, pretty much at Aqueduct and Saratoga. Belmont, we run how many? What do we run? 2 or 3 2-turn races a year on the dirt.
No, it's more a turf. I mean, sadly, it's more a turf situation, right?
But he's right about the sprints. It's such a small sample size,
right?
Unless you bunch them for a week and you feel like they're right.
Oh, here's my, I guess, follow-up question to that is, if we could give you a multi-year sample of data, right? Does that change your approach a little or solve some of the small sample size in that maybe, I don't want to, that you can compute over that kind of volume of data a more I don't know what the right word to say this is, a more I don't know, a more pure relationship. Pure is not the right word. I don't know what I'm saying, but is there an actual obvious relationship that you could use instead of being so centered on the day, the week, the thing, if you had a bigger sample set, I guess is what my question is.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I had just more, because it's bias is so like temporal, right? Where
Right.
like it comes and it goes. Right. So I probably like, and also like paths change from like the back stretch to the front stretch, I would imagine. Right. And so that's some of the like 2-turn dirt races. They run on the front stretch twice, right? Versus sprints. So I think there probably is something there, right? Where like they would run on a bias for a longer distance, so it might actually affect the race more or less in a sprint or something like that. I think there's something there. I just don't know how much is there. It would be something I would be interested in probably looking at, to be honest.
Okay. And to follow up with that, like, I guess that's kind of what I'm thinking. I'll call it your recipe or your ingredients list. Like, could you go over again how much you're using race, daily, weekly?
Yep. So I could pull that slide up again.
I guess the word I was trying to look for was like, again, this isn't perfect, more like, what's the platonic ideal, right? Like, is there some established 10-year chart of what it looks like that you could then adjust off of? And maybe that's an ideal that's more than we should really be thinking.
Okay, yeah, having establishing like a baseline, right?
Correct.
That kind of thing. Yeah.
Is there some baseline? Maybe there's not, but
right. So this was
Yes,
the recipe that you were
Yes.
referencing, and this is also addressed in the actual Kaggle submission, right? But it's 3 components. There's each individual race, and then there's all the races on the same day, and then there's all the races in the same racing week, right? So it's those 3 components. And you can see at the end the races for the week, while the average of all those is on a 20 to 20 scale, right? I didn't want that to be have the same weight, because like Thursday to Sunday, a lot could change, right? It might indicate a persistent bias, but a lot changes in a couple day span. So I didn't want that to have the same effect. So I thought it was a diminishing, and I thought that was probably the right way to go. And it was kind of verified in a way, because like I said, there was a lot of evidence that my bias did indicate something, right? So I was kind of pleased with how this recipe turned out. Even though, I mean, there was a lot of stats that went into it and a lot of trial and error, but ultimately I thought that 40%, 40%, 20% was kind of the right way to split it up.
it's interesting. That's actually one area you could probably use machine learning to tune the recipe, right? Like,
Yeah.
maybe it should be 38%, 42%, That's one thing that machine learning is actually really good about, right?
Yes.
It's like, that's how I tune up my win odds. Like, the daily double is worth X%, the implied exacta odds are worth X%, and we basically just ran that all through like optimization programming,
Right.
to figure out.
And the only thing that would stop me from doing that is I didn't have like a data set with all the answers, right? Like I don't know what the actual bias metric should be,
Right.
because no one does, right? Because I invented it, right? So with I mean, my understanding of that machine learning is, you have to tell the computer, okay, this is the data set and these are the answers, and now take those and try and learn and come up with your own. So anyway, because there are no actual answers,
Right.
right? Like you could
You'd
kind of
have to get creative.
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
figure out
Yeah,
how to do it.
fine tune it and
Yeah.
and tweak it a little bit. Yeah, you could use some sort of machine learning to kind of adjust that recipe as needed.
Okay. Let me talk to you. Let me ask you here. I guess you could also take that. Andy said something earlier that I thought was interesting. Is you could actually, once you have your ratings, you could actually layer over that like jockey pathway decisions and figure out which jockeys are picking up bias or which jockeys are ignoring bias, I guess, right?
That was exactly, if I was going to study this again next year or something, that would be the first thing that I would look at. Because if I was an owner, I want a jockey who pays attention to that stuff.
Yeah. Right. Like Davis, you think Ron would really enjoy that metric?
Yeah, I'm sure he would.
So
Add on that too. Two thoughts I had. Obviously, the jockey's decision making playing into these biases, but one thought which could be interesting is obviously to give more information over a course of 3, 4, 5 years, and then I'm wondering if this could also be used as like a strategic decision making for our racetrack superintendent, to compare that with the historical information that we have of the moisture levels in the track, maybe even, historical weather patterns. And if I don't know how much is in our control or how much they can do, if they can, create future decisions based off what we've already learned between all that. But I don't know the possibility of that. Just a thought.
no, that's why we're here, for exactly that reason. That's right. Like from Glenn's the racetrack super, Kyle. From Glenn's point of view, he wants to put the most fair surface out there.
Right.
Like every time, it's much more an art than science of tinkering with it. Hence why he spends so much time on his tractor.
Depends who you ask, Joe.
I'm sorry?
It depends who you ask. You
Yeah.
have paranoid friends.
As a horse player, could I put in a vote to not change the track throughout the day? Just leave it.
You could, yeah, we could.
I actually agree with that. I think I think it's a slippery slope. We do that, to be honest.
Well, it's interesting, in the U.S. Open sometimes, because they like want to make the conditions so hard. There are many times, like late on Sunday afternoon, where they've over dried out the surfaces, where they start watering the greens, which is like clearly unfair to the guys
Right.
who
Yeah.
just played.
Right.
The golfers who already fished in the morning, they're like, what the hell? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say theoretically we wanted to put something like this in production, right? We wanted to give Andy the ability to say on November 23rd, it was a dead rail. We had a -15, right? Like in retrospect, like 3 weeks later, the next time the horse runs, that's not that hard, right? I guess if we wanted to do something like automating it to do, like, I guess my question is, how quickly can you do that? Can you get a number on a race?
How quickly do you get the GPS data?
We can get it in real time. So
then you could have the race metric within 20 seconds, probably.
Do we trust the GPS data?
we don't trust it in every single race, but we trust it in aggregate. Yes.
Okay.
Right. The issue is, and this was an issue that many of the competitors had with Kaggle, is where is the finish line? right? Because
Right.
the GPS data kept going, right? So that would be the only thing is because when I first did this, when I just let's see the correlations between finishing position and distance. It was always that the winners ran the longest, and I was like, "What the hell is wrong with this data set?" And it was every race, the winners ran the longest, and I was like, "What is happening?" And then I realized that they were doing the gallop out, right? It included the gallop out for all these horses. So that's the only thing is if you could pinpoint when to stop recording once they cross the finish line, then you could get a race metric in seconds.
So it's interesting. That's been in talking to the other winning teams and looking for feedback on the competition. That was the number one criticism they had is that they felt we should have given the track coordinates and dimensions more exactly so that they understood, exactly where they were.
Right. And there was workarounds, and that's what a lot of people
Correct.
found, right? So I
Right,
mean,
it also separated out those with skills versus not, too.
correct. And it really wasn't a huge issue. It took like an algebra 1 level understanding of math to figure out where it crosses, right? But in real time, I mean, it could still work.
No,
Yeah, to answer your question, it will not take long.
Okay. So the interesting thing is we actually do a lot of work with the GPS companies, right, to map our tracks. So they have exact coordinate data, right, that they can do it to give you an idea of what's going on. So we recently switched from Trackus to a company called TPD, Total Performance Data, which has a product called Davis, what are we calling that thing now?
Gmax.
Gmax. So they're going to be like the official provider, similar to the way Trackus is. They're tied in with
still just a little thing that goes right in the
yeah, they have two of them. One of the things, so it's seeming like that data may not be as accurate as the Trackus. The Trackus data was surprisingly accurate considering how dated the technology is. So Gmax may not be quite as accurate as Trackus, or I can't tell if it's not as accurate or it has a latency issue because it's going GPS back down instead of LPS, which are these local positioning. It may be a latency issue as opposed to an accuracy issue, right? So we're investigating. Davis and I are also investigating the idea of putting actually a second device on the horses, one that's more focused on equine welfare and performance that might have gyroscopic, basically being able to tell movements other than just straight ahead or side to side, specific limb movements, heart rate, that sort of thing. But this is in its infancy.
Well,
I saw a video at RTIP of some doctor or someone who said they could figure out if a horse is going lame like instantly or something. It was something at RTIP this past year. It was interesting.
Yes, he's full of crap.
Yeah.
So
you know the presentation I'm talking about.
Yes. Yeah. No. He actually beta tested with us. Davis had the unfortunate deal of having to deal with them.
Oh, well, there goes that.
Well, I'll just give you an example. Let's say we had 16 breakdowns last year. That's out of 14,000, 15,000 starters. Right. It's like the law of small numbers, right? It's like that bullseye is way too small to target, So his response, what he did was he tuned his model to a year's worth of data, then went and back tested it against that same data, and claimed that he found 14 of 16 or 16 of 18 breakdowns. And
that was like 80% was the number he claimed, I think.
Yeah, it's a joke. So when we prospectively tested it this year on 3 weeks in Saratoga, there was no metric I could find that was any different than the overall horse population. So number of horses that ran back within 6 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, number of who went up in class, who went down in class. It was like identical. The horses they pointed out as like, these are your danger horses, included like 2 graded stakes winners. That, you know, it was ridiculous.
Huh. Well, it was a good presentation. There goes.
Yeah. However, we were very encouraged by the idea of that, and the idea of collecting more information along the lines of what human sport does. And one of the ideas behind Kaggle competition was this kind of idea: we want to open it up to more researchers, right? I don't want a black box solution to our problem. Like, it would be much better if we had open research and various people working on these problems to create competition, to have validation, you know, you name it. So we are in that process at the beginning, but still in it. And the idea of opening up data to guys like Joe Longo, who just got off, which used to be anathema to NYRA management and Equibase. Well, Equibase, it's still anathema to them, but we don't care what they think. We're going to go ahead and do it anyway. So I think there is, well, I know there is like opportunity to do some of these projects. So it's kind of exciting to see that. Like, I would love to know, here's an example, like, Davis, can we tie speed bias or not, or negative speed bias to injuries? Like, I'd love to lay over those races, especially on the dirt, right? Against horses that get injured or horses that don't return. Like, you know, no one may want to hear that result.
That's the problem, Joe. The problem is you get into that area and we're going to be told, don't tell people when there's a bias. Trust me, I've been there.
Okay. But
I agree with you completely.
right.
But
it's a new world. Like, you're right. But until we go down that road, we can't make progress on breakdowns and injuries until we actually address some of that. So, like, I'll give you an example, Andy. On Thursday last week, when I came out and I was moaning to you, like, why are we here? It's rainy and cold and no one wants to race. Yeah, maybe the solution is something so radical for horse racing, but not radical for any other sport, is, hey, don't race on Thursday, just move that race to next Monday or next Tuesday, or, you know, or why are we racing?
There's a different problem with that, Joe. Here's what's going to happen. They're going to start moving all the races synthetic on the days that it rains. And that's a disaster for our handle, for racing. It's bringing, I agree with you. And I don't have any problem with saying the bias does that and announcing the data. You just know it's going to, you just know it's going to happen. You just know it's going to happen.
I guess here's my point, is I'd rather deal with the second level problem when I get there. I want to know the truth first, so I know what the actual problem is.
I'm going to tell you, I've been around racing long enough to know what's going to happen when we start doing that.
Yeah, look, I hear you. This is my life, but
right. Well, mine too.
Well, Kyle, let me ask you a question here. So,
sure.
Going back to data for a second. So, Trackus, and then I'll switch over to GMAX. So, Trackus was your most basic XY GPS coordinate.
Mm-hmm.
GMAX actually has an accelerometer in it also. When Joe is bringing up the gyroscopic indicators and whatnot, so the second device that we're looking through right now in terms of more precise for welfare, those have, you know, your XY accelerometer, multiple sometimes gyroscopes, and then some megtrometers. Even just from the Trackus to the GMAX with that accelerometer, would that be beneficial in your world to having that extra data indicator, or would that make much of a difference?
My initial thought is it probably doesn't make a whole lot of difference with just speaking from track bias. XY is probably sufficient. And I mean, having all that data, if I see what it looked like and all the different possibilities, but I was able to pretty much get everything I needed fairly easily just with the XY data.
Got it. Okay.
Right.
And if the accelerometer data was in there, we're just not sure what could come out of it because we haven't done the work yet, obviously.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay. Okay, sorry, go ahead, Kyle.
Oh, no, that's it.
Okay, so let's talk about the competition for a minute, unless anyone has anything else.
Nope.
Thoughts on the competition, how we can improve it, what was good about it, bad about it, like.
I loved it. I thought it hit me right between the eyes. Right. So I saw it actually. I was watching Saratoga on the YouTube broadcast, and I think that was when you guys first launched it, or at least the publicity for it.
Yeah, it was
right?
Andy and me doing our Mutt and Jeff routine, basically.
Yeah, see, yep, there it was. And so, I have been doing data and horse racing for a decade, and then all of a sudden I was like, okay, now there's a competition with horse racing and data, and I was like, okay, that works. So, initially, and this was remedied early on, but initially there were no finishing positions, right? And so I was like, okay. So then I reached out to some people I knew, and they sent me the results file from every race, and so I was actually able to get the finishing positions on my own. And basically after I put in, I don't know, hours of work, then right then was when you amended the data sets to include them. So I was like, son of a bitch. And then
sorry about that.
But that was just a funny little aside. But I thought everything was fine, and like I said, there was the slight pain in the butt where you had to kind of figure out roughly where the finishing line was. But with a little clever problem solving, you were able to do that. But for my purposes, right? And I was trying to find something that horse players could use, and horse men and horse women could use, and something just a new way of looking at it. And I feel like I was able to do that pretty successfully, right? Because like if I were a trainer, I'd want to know, perhaps my horses ran with or against the bias, or if I'm an owner, I want to know, which jockeys are the best, or most attuned with the track, so I feel like it actually can be used, and it could, I feel like it's pretty easy to digest for most people, and so I thought the competition was good. I thought the timeline was good.
It's not going to be easy for the jockeys who you say don't know what's going on to digest.
No, that wouldn't be so good for them when they keep hugging that rail when they're sinking.
We got a lot of them. I don't know, Joe, if you think this is relevant. I think that Kyle, I don't know if he's in a unique position, but it feels like he's the one person that we got involved with or did a good job in this that's a horse player. Is that correct?
Yeah, the other guys know nothing about.
Right.
One guy we were on with earlier today, Andy, kept calling them games. He doesn't even know it was races.
Obviously, Kyle's not going to go on the Fox show because, as you know and I know, that's we maybe if you had 80 IQ points less, we could work that out. But maybe is it worth doing some kind of video to make it accessible on the NYRA website? Just 10 to 15 minutes of him talking about what his process and his thoughts on it, just to at least make it a little bit accessible to the fans that we have that do care about it. I mean, it's not a big deal, but it might be worth it. What do you think? We did this whole thing like this guy.
I think it's a great idea. It's a good thing Longo's not on. He'd be stealing the credit for it right now. But,
right, he'll do that later. He can do that. You and I will never try to, so he'll be doing it later. Don't worry. I vacuum on that.
Look, I think Kyle. I think the point is we would like to see what we can make of this and see if we can make something of it that is usable by fans. Highlight the work you did and highlight this is an area I think obviously near and dear to Andy's heart, is educating people so they're understanding what the basic concepts of handicapping are, right? So yeah, I think we got to figure out how to move that forward, Andy.
And I'll tell you something else. I don't know how we get there, if we do get there. The one thing we know about Dave O'Rourke, he likes numbers, and he loves the concept of distilling things down to one number, which makes a lot of sense. And the idea that you could theoretically look at a track at a given day and say, it's a 20, whatever, you could come up with a number for that day. And, I think you and I none of us will think it's that complicated. Some people might, but for the people that are willing to use it and find it interesting, it's not that complicated, especially if you distill it down to a number. So I think that we should think of it as somewhat of an end goal, that somehow we get a number out for every day. Yeah. Maybe my track trends have your number. Maybe you add them a week later. I don't care about that. You know what I mean? If that's a possibility, something to throw.
There's nothing you'd like more than when Anthony says it's a golden rail for you to go, but it was a -4, Anthony.
Anthony has no idea it's a gold rail, so you'll never have to worry about that.
So yeah, I think we need to. Yes, Andy, I couldn't agree more. So
and
Kyle,
I think people's experience. I think people would love it. Anything that we do, we're not going to appeal. Listen, don't give up on trying to appeal to the masses. Succeed when you appeal to a few.
Right, and with the way the formula is, you could only get the bias for just that one race immediately, because then it would take after the racing day is over and after the racing week is over to get a full picture of what happened. But you could at least get a -20 to +20 for one race. You could get that immediately.
Yeah, but you could do a flat. I mean, there's all sorts of ways around that, right? Hey, we got a flash number. It'll be updated at the end of the day or the end of the week. You could build
around so you could come if we decide to tape something. I mean, I can always tape anything I want anytime. Could you be able to come out to Aqueduct someday to do it?
I think he's in Chicago, so it might be a bit. Are you in Chicago still or no?
I'm in Chicago. Yeah.
You come to Saratoga?
Well, I would love to go to Saratoga, and as a school teacher, I get summers off. So
the bartender there, we get you a job tending bar like all the other school teachers.
Yeah, I hear that's what they do.
We could also do it by Zoom. We could figure it out.
We'll figure it out. Kyle, essentially, I think what we'd like you to think about is if you have access to a more robust data set, right? And I know what I actually like about your metric very much is that it's simple. It doesn't actually take 150 data points, and it doesn't take advantage. It's not a neural network or anything crazy. It's actually very simple, which I think has a lot of value to it, right? It's explainable. It's going to be more stable. There's less chances of co-fitting it to other issues, Right. But I think if we can give you a more robust data set, meaning more years, more tracks, we'll probably have to manage the switch over to Gmax, but whatever. How we might be able to automate that and produce it on some sort of regular basis, I think would be interesting. And then I think in support of that, Andy, you would do the video almost like explain what is this thing you're seeing on our programs or wherever they put it.
Yeah, I love the idea of doing the videos in general, and you have it up there, and it's sort of an evergreen thing that people can look at if they want to, and we'll promote it a little bit, and I'll promote it. And like I said,
interesting thing
to want to look will.
Yeah. I'm sorry. One interesting thing I think is to look and see, like, are horses that are effective one way or the other by a bias, aided or hindered, are they overbet or underbet in their next race out, right? Like, how does their performance compare to the public's perception?
Right, and I tried to point out a couple of those in my Kaggle presentation that for some of them the winners ran duds the next time out, and I mean that was kind of picking and choosing spots, but something holistically it might be an interesting exercise is to see the horses that were bias aided what happened next time out.
Right, and you can with some of the data we have, you can actually compare it to like probably a little more robustly, like a wins over expected, or way, or
Right.
finishing position over expected, or something like that.
Like I do that personally for like jockeys and trainers, is wins over expected, that
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Uh,
You could do, I mean, because my code, the nice thing about it is you can pretty much plug in any data and it should work for whatever data set, right? So like Andy has copious notes on 2020 races and 2021 races and 2022 races. So like if you plug in those races into my program, it should be able to spit out the exact same bias metric, and at the very least you should see if it matches his notes for those, and I would imagine it would.
Yeah, all I have is the daily bias.
Well, right, but you're very, it seems like you're very organized with when you think a bias is present versus not.
It's easy to look up on the site, yeah, for sure. It was like 6 years of them or something, so it's
Right.
really easy, yeah.
that's an interesting experiment to run, right? Is to run your code versus 6 years and then compare to your notes, Andy, and see like, hey, like, oh, look at that. You know what I mean?
That's why I found those days the end of the year particularly interesting, because I felt they were somewhat ambiguous. Because listen, you can look at these things, you can try to put it all together, but there are days where you're just not sure. Guys stay away from the rail. So is it really a bad rail, or the rider's being safe? So it's really interesting to hear your data, because it's going to be a confirmation one way, or a little bit of a confirmation at the very least, if not a big significant one way or the other. Gee, I thought it might have been. No, it wasn't. I thought it might have been. Yes, it was. So that's why those are the days I find particularly fascinating to go through with you in general.
Hey, Kyle, if I want to find your code, it's in your presentation? I always get
It's
like this.
100% of the code I used is in the presentation.
Okay. Because Maggie's going to jump on and start yelling at me, but I always get confused where the code is. So,
Nope.
Okay, we'll find it in there.
I'm gonna run, but let's stay in touch with this, Joe.
No, I think we will, Kyle. I have your contact information.
And thanks.
This was
I really
great.
appreciate it. It was great.
Congratulations. You almost won the whole thing. And the guy, just so you know, the guy who won, or his team, he had a team of 6, not one guy.
Oh, fair.
And Brendan, the guy who's won, has also won the NFL's Big Data Derby and the NHL's, I don't know what they call
Shouldn't he be disqualified? We give all the money to Kyle.
Yeah, there we go. That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Those guys are like 3 of the guys on his team work for a full-time for sports analytics company called Zealous. So you're in very rarefied air.
There we go. I was able to get lucky. There we go.
Later. Thanks again.
Anyway, great job, guys. Maggie, thank you for setting all this up. We appreciate it.
No problem. Congratulations. Bye-bye.
Hi, guys.
So you could email me with